Joined here on Buckeye Talk by Max Chadwick of PFF. Max, what's your official title over there? College guru?
College football analyst for PFF.
Okay. So that means you've been analyzing college football players, and we analyze college football players, and now we're getting ready for the NFL Combine, which is taking place this week, and Nathan and I are going to be there in Indianapolis doing all this coverage, and we are very intrigued, I think, Max, off the bat by C.J. Stroud and how the NFL is going to view C.J. Stroud. So let's just start there. What is your impression? We all know what C.J. Stroud was at Ohio State. What's your impression of C.J. Stroud as an NFL draft prospect?
So first of all, it's awesome you guys are going to the Combine. They're sending me to the Combine too, so hopefully we can meet up at some point during that week. But yeah, C.J. Stroud, I'm a big fan of C.J. Stroud, and I know a lot of people are trying to, start the Will Levis QB2 train, or maybe even QB1 train, or even Anthony Richardson or anything like that. And C.J. Stroud seems to be a guy that everyone just keeps forgetting about in this draft, and I think he's still the second best quarterback in this draft. And it's a fascinating case study, honestly, because you look at who he's thrown to over the last 2 years. You've got Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka. You can make an argument that's 5 first-round wide receivers. And then he's also got, one of the best offensive lines in the country blocking for. So, Bucky Brooks from NFL Network has a great analogy for quarterbacks, and it's, are you a scorer or are you a shooter? And meaning, if you're a shooter, that means, hey, if everything's set up for me, I can knock down the shot. When you're a scorer, it's I can do, like a Bryce Young kind of, where it's like I can make something happen on my own. And for C.J. Stroud, his entire career has basically been a great shooter. When everything's set up for him, he's going to make the shot every single time. However, that was a big knock on him. That Georgia game proved a lot for me. And he was under pressure a ton in that game. The receivers were kind of, they were getting open, but it's still like the defensive line, Jalen Carter, who's going to be a top pick in this draft, he was constantly under pressure. And C.J. Stroud was awesome in that game. And that game really opened my eyes a little bit and said, you know what? He's a great shooter, but he could also maybe be a great scorer too. So I still think he's the second best quarterback in this draft. His job in the NFL is undoubtedly going to get harder. Obviously, it's for every prospect that's the case, but he's got NFL-ready tools. He's probably the most accurate quarterback in this class. I would argue he actually is. His 26.7% rate of perfectly placed passes is the highest among all quarterbacks in the country over the last 2 years. So I'm a big fan of his. Again, the supporting cast is definitely a question mark for him, but I think he's still good enough to be potentially a franchise quarterback.
Max, as we followed him over these past 3 years, but especially the past 2, you mentioned those NFL-ready tools. A tool that always jumps out to us is his mind, the way that he sees the game, the way he processes it, and that obviously has great value for NFL teams. But obviously through the draft process, a lot of those other physical tools get focused on a lot, and that's why you see maybe certain players start to rise up through these last weeks heading into the draft. So how do you, when you analyze C.J. Stroud, compare that brain versus those other tools that NFL teams value so much? And I guess just maybe you can go into more detail on what you see as the NFL-ready tools for him.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's a great point, is that his mind, the accuracy I think is the biggest thing, but it's his mind, man, the timing and all that. And, we can make the argument, all the receivers were great, but he's also hitting them in stride every single time, hitting them on time every single time. And that says a lot. And I think Bryce Young's best tool is his mental processing. Obviously the height is a big question mark for him. And I think C.J. Stroud, you can make the same argument that one of his best tools besides his accuracy is his mental processing. I think his arm strength is good enough. There's no question marks there, but it's not like Anthony Richardson, who's going to launch balls 80 yards downfield, or even a Will Levis or anything like that. But I think his arm talent is still good enough. I don't think he's as good on the move. I think this guy is a pure pocket passer, and unlike like a guy like Bryce Young, who can create on the move a little bit. So that's a bit of a question mark, especially when his performance under pressure hasn't been great besides that Georgia game. But I still see, like you mentioned, his mental tools, I think, are up there with the best in the class. And I think his physical tools, especially his arm talent, is good enough to make it in the NFL.
So I don't know if I'm going to be physically capable of having a Will Levis discussion during the process of this NFL draft season, because it's going to be all Josh Allen comparisons. And I didn't think Josh Allen was going to be any good in the NFL. Then he turned out to be Josh Allen, but he still is kind of Josh Allen-y in a weird way enough times that I'm like, okay, that hit, I don't know that it means that every big dude who can kind of move around and you're not exactly sure about the other stuff is going to be Josh Allen. So I don't want to have a Will Levis conversation. I'll let my brain explode in April if we get to that point. Is there possibly, Max, a Bryce Young, CJ Stroud conversation as the best quarterback in this draft? CJ Stroud is like 6'3". It feels like people are expecting Bryce Young at the combine, and we'll find out, to measure under 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
You know, the short quarterback thing, I think, is less of an issue than it used to be, but I don't know that it's completely gone. Do you think there's any possibility that CJ Stroud is the first quarterback taken in this draft?
I think there is. And I think there's more. For me, I think Bryce Young is, for me at least, clearly the number one quarterback, and I think CJ Stroud is clearly the number two quarterback. But I have some friends who cover the NFL draft, and they have CJ Stroud as QB1, and they see his tools as better than Bryce Young, and that Georgia game for them as well proved a lot in that game. So I personally think Bryce Young should be the number one pick, but there's an argument, and I know there are teams that, you mentioned, how the size is not that big of an issue anymore. There are still teams who are a little old-fashioned in that sense, and they say, hey, if you're not 6'3", man, I don't know. And especially, the 5'10", he's probably measured around 5'10", 5'11", if I had to guess, based on some pictures of him next to people who we know what their height is. But also, the other thing that I think teams are going to question is he's probably going to be around 190, maybe even fewer pounds at the combine. Maybe he puts on some water weight to try to boost that up a little bit. But still, I mean, this is a guy who you can question. He's gotten hurt already this year with a shoulder injury. You can question his durability at the next level. I don't think it's as big of an issue because we had the same question marks about Bryce Young heading out of high school when he was a top quarterback recruit. And we're like, okay, how is he going to handle the SEC at that size? Pretty damn good. He was a Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. But I still think Bryce Young should be the top quarterback prospect. But there are going to be teams that say, hey, you know what? I'd rather take the physical tools, the 6'3" pocket passer, over the guy who's probably going to be 5'10", 190. Like, there are teams that are going to be a little bit scared by that.
One of the things that is used in shorthand of all draft analysis, whatever the sport is the comparables. Is there someone, when you look at CJ, that you say, here's a guy in the NFL that's already kind of succeeding with that same general skill set / build / processing, all those things you're talking about?
Yeah, so Mike Werner, who's our lead draft analyst at PFF, he put out his draft guide. He has him as Ryan Tannehill for the comp. I don't know if I agree with that because I think Tannehill's a little bit more mobile. A comp that I always had before this season was Matt Ryan.
Wait. He's Ryan Tannehill, but not quite Ryan Tannehill? Oh, come on, Werner, no. I cannot accept that.
I don't agree with the Ryan Tannehill comp because I don't think he's as mobile as Tannehill was, but Mike does amazing stuff. But I think he's more of a Matt Ryan, where it's like a pocket passer. Is he going to make throws on the move? Not that much. But Matt Ryan won an MVP, man. And Matt Ryan is another guy that I think, in a really good supporting cast, can win you some games, can win an MVP even, led the Falcons to the Super Bowl and almost won them that Super Bowl, if not for the greatest disaster in Super Bowl history in that comeback for the Patriots. But he's a guy I think a lot like Matt Ryan, where it's going to be dependent, obviously, on the supporting cast, and almost any quarterback, you say that as well. So I think a Matt Ryan comp is what I would go with, at least for CJ Stroud, and that he's a great pocket passer with a good enough arm. Matt Ryan, the big argument for Matt Ryan has been, okay, how good is Matt Ryan versus how good was Julio Jones? That's kind of the argument for CJ Stroud. It goes, how good is CJ Stroud, or how good were those wide receivers that he was throwing to? So they're kind of similar in that way as well. But Matt Ryan's been a really good quarterback for a very long time. Could be a Hall of Famer. We'll see. I don't know if he will be or not. But I think CJ Stroud is a lot like Matt Ryan in my eyes.
Last year at the Combine, Desmond Ridder said he was a combination of Deshaun Watson and Ryan Tannehill. And I was like, what? How do you even do that? It was like a minotaur. It's like we took Ryan Tannehill's. Who would think of that? I was like, that is the craziest, combo mixture of well, I'm a little bit Watson, I'm a little bit Tannehill. And I know Tannehill was a top 10 pick. So it's like, now you get to this point. It's like, oh, what's Ryan Tannehill? I don't know, a top 10 pick that's been a starting quarterback for a decade, and I'm acting like who would want to be Ryan Tannehill? It's like, I don't know, that sounds pretty good. CJ Stroud wants to be Joe Burrow. I don't know. I think Joe, we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, Max. I think Joe's a little better athlete and moves around a little bit more. I think Matt Ryan is really interesting. Ryan Day has a Matt Ryan signed jersey in his office because Ryan Day was the receivers coach at Boston College when Matt Ryan was there. So this makes me wonder if Ryan Day has had Matt Ryan conversations with CJ Stroud. So I would be very intrigued by that idea. Is there anything when you have a quarterback prospect like this, Max? And I don't know. Who knows? I don't know if they're going to throw on air. I don't know. Whatever. They all do their pro day. Do you think the measurables are like, if CJ does any of the stuff, agility drills, 40 time, jumping stuff, is anything going to matter with him? Like, for instance, again, this whole debate about running, off-platform throws, that kind of thing that you're saying, hey, the Georgia game maybe showed you something. If he tests pretty athletically, would that matter? Or is this really going to be a processing accuracy decision on CJ Stroud for everybody anyway, and the testing won't matter either way?
I think that's an interesting question because I think if he goes out there and he runs a 4.5-ish, which is really fast for a quarterback, that could open up some eyes. But I mean, I think for quarterbacks especially, the testing shouldn't sway you too much because it's like even if that guy goes out there and runs a 4.4, he's not going to change his play style. You know, it's not like he's going to be like, oh, now all of a sudden you can be a great runner. I know Desmond Ridder ran pretty fast 40 time last year, and a lot of people are like, wow, like he could be one of the best mobile quarterbacks in the league. And he just wasn't. Like, he's still like a pocket passer. So it's not, I don't think CJ Stroud's going to drastically change his play style. I think if he runs a really fast time, there are going to be some people out there who say, oh my God, you know, and maybe boost him up to number one. I'm not going to be swayed too much by, even if he runs a really slow time, it's like we know who he is. You know, we know he's this pocket passer, and really the physical tools really can't shine too much besides the arm talent there. So I think we kind of know who CJ Stroud is, and I'm at least not going to let the combine testing sway me too much anyway.
Doug, do you have anything else you want to ask on CJ, or should we transition to Jaxon?
I'm good on CJ. If you're good on CJ, why don't you take us to Jaxon, Nathan?
Yeah, and you know, the question you just asked is an interesting transition into Jaxon, because whereas CJ may not have a lot to gain from the combine or the pre-draft process, Jaxon seems like he has everything to gain through that right now. Just as an analyst, you didn't get anything other than, you know, a few snaps that didn't mean a whole lot in terms of evaluation this past year. How important is this combine for Jaxon Smith-Njigba as far as setting himself up for this draft?
I think it's very important. And I think one of the biggest question marks for Jaxon Smith-Njigba right now is obviously the health. You know, he missed, I think he only played like 60 snaps total this year with that hamstring injury. I think the biggest thing is his health. And the other biggest question is, what's his speed like? And we'll see when he runs the 40. So I think that's his biggest question mark, is that he maybe isn't the fastest wide receiver out there. He's not really going to run away from any corners. He's really not going to run away from many safeties either. However, I mean, we can get into it a little bit. I think he's still the best receiver in this draft. I love Jaxon from a year ago, and there really wasn't a receiver this year. I know Quentin Johnson has the physical tools that people are going crazy over. Man, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was the best receiver in college football, and that was on a team with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who were a year older. And by the way, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Mecca Booker were freshmen too, so you got to put that in there. But it's a lot like, you know, I'm not comparing him to this guy who's a superstar, but if you remember that LSU team, it's like, wow, they had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson was clearly the number 2 receiver, and he was a year older than Jamar Chase. Like, it was kind of like that for me, where it was like, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was clearly the number 1 receiver on this team, and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who were both studs in the NFL already as rookies, they were a year older than him, and they're already that good. So I think it's a bad receiver class personally. I don't know if I touched Jaxon Smith-Njigba until like the top 20-ish, but I still think he is the top receiver I'd probably go with in this draft.
So our colleague Stephen Means wrote a lot of stuff in the preseason before Jackson's season exploded, comparing C.J. Stroud and Jaxon Smith-Njigba to Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. And that ability to just kind of find a way to get open. You have a relationship with your quarterback. You're a good route runner, but also you have a sense of the field. You have the physical attributes to allow yourself to do it. You have good hands. I said wow in there because Quentin Johnston's like a prototypical number one receiver, right? He's 6'4". He's that big. He's that big go get it kind of guy. And Jaxon, if Jaxon had been healthy the whole year and had a 2,000-yard season, he wasn't going to grow. He is who he is. Now he's still. Some draft boards will see Jaxon right now as a third receiver behind Johnston, but also behind Jordan Addison. I would take Jaxon ahead of Jordan Addison. Nothing against Jordan Addison. I think it would be between Quentin Johnston and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. But if Jaxon Smith-Njigba hits in the NFL, Max, like what does it look like? Is it okay? So it's one of those, maybe he's not the fastest. It's almost like a CJ Stroud conversation, maybe. Yeah. Maybe he's not the fastest. Maybe he's not the biggest, but he's smart. He's a good route runner. He knows how to get open. If you throw him the ball near him, he's going to catch it. I know. It's one of those things. Hey, Cooper Kupp, he was good in the Super Bowl. Let's compare everybody to Cooper Kupp. I know. But what does the top side of Jaxon Smith-Njigba look like?
I think he could be one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. And that's, something that you look at and you're like, okay, slot receiver, whatever. No. Like slot receivers has become increasingly important every single year, both at college and NFL level. And our comp right now in our draft guy from Mike Werner was Julian Edelman. And Julian Edelman, it was one of the best receivers in the league, regardless of, being a slot receiver. So I think Quentin Johnston has some question marks. I think Quentin Johnston physically, by far, is the best receiver in this draft physically. But I think everything else, man, Jaxon Smith-Njigba just does an elite level. And obviously the top end speed's not there. The question mark over the hamstring injury is obviously up there too. But again, that sophomore tape was so freaking ridiculous, especially that Rose Bowl game, man. I was against Clark Phillips III, who could be a second round corner in this draft, or maybe even a first round, depending on his testing. So that was so impressive to me. And I think it's close between him and Quentin Johnston. I'm not saying he's far and away my wide receiver one, but that sophomore tape was by far the best tape I've seen from any of these receiver prospects in this year's draft. So I would still take him number one, and I think his ceiling could be one of the best slot receivers, and then also one of the best receivers, period, in the NFL. And I think Julian Edelman's a pretty good comp for him.
That slot question is interesting because, and I was seeing this morning that Steve Smith, a guy who was a NFL receiver for a long time, had come out and did a little video breakdown of Jaxon and was very complimentary of him and kind of defending some of the criticisms. And Jaxon retweeted it and said oh, I really appreciate that. You're one of my favorite players, but I'm not just a slot guy. He has to make sure that he gets that in there. How important do you think it is during this process that he proves himself to be beyond a slot guy, if that's even possible for him physically right now? Or do you think that if you prove yourself to be enough of a weapon in the slot, that still makes you a first-round caliber receiver right now?
I mentioned how slot receivers are underrated and how they can be up there with the best receivers in the league. I still think teams look at the dominant outside receiver, and it should be. Quentin Johnston is that. But, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I was excited for his junior year because he played his entire sophomore year in the slot with Wilson and Olave on the outside, and it was kind of like, okay, maybe this year he can take over on the outside a little bit. He has good size. It's not like he's a tiny receiver. He's 6'1", 200. Which is around the average size for a wide receiver. So I'm not really that worried about his size or anything like that. I just want to see him produce on the outside. And again, not comparing him to this guy, but Justin Jefferson only played in the slot in college too. That was his biggest question mark coming out of LSU is, can this guy play on the outside? And as we've seen, he's probably the best receiver in the NFL right now. So I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba, we haven't seen him play on the outside yet, so I'm not saying he can't do it. But right now, to me, he just looks like that ultra reliable slot receiver that is going to be a quarterback's best friend immediately when he gets into the NFL. And I think he's going to be really, really good in the NFL as one of the best slot receivers in the league, in my opinion.
All right, let's transition to what I think is one of the most interesting battles in this draft, and it is to be the first tackle taken. And it feels like it's between Peter Skoronski of Northwestern and Paris Johnson of Ohio State. Max, what do you think the determining factor will be as teams who are picking, I don't know, somewhere between 6 and 14, maybe make a choice between those two guys? And who would you take?
Oh, that's tough. I would I would lean Skoronski right now, but this upcoming combine week is going to be huge for both of them. And the testing, sure, is going to be big. The big thing you got to watch out for, though, is the measurements. And I think the arm length measurement is going to be a big swing factor for Peter Skoronski because he is not a very big tackle. He's 6'4", doesn't really have that long of an arms. And there's kind of a threshold that teams have as to whether or not you can make it as a tackle in the NFL. And if he doesn't hit that threshold, he might be lower. Paris Johnson Jr. does not have any of those issues. Paris Johnson Jr. looks like you're created in a lab offensive tackle. 6'6", 310 pounds, very fluid mover as well. I think that all the physical tools, physically, he's the best. He's like kind of like the Quentin Johnston of this class, where physically that's what you want in a tackle. And he kicked out the tackle this year after playing guard last year. He had actually really good year as well. So I think right now I would lean Peter Skoronski only because we've seen 3 years of elite play from him in the Big Ten as a left tackle. And we've only seen one really good year from Paris Johnson at left tackle. But I still think, if you're going for physical tools, there isn't a better toolsy tackle in this draft, I think, than Paris Johnson Jr.
The other Ohio State offensive lineman that's created some buzz, and he's coming out early, is Luke Wypler, and it was a little bit of a surprise to Ohio State that he would make the jump when he did. What sort of valuation have you been able to get on him, and that would lead you to believe whether that was the right decision for him to come out early and be drafted at the right place to make that pay off, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's one of the best centers in this draft, honestly, and he's one of the best centers in college football over the past couple seasons. And I think he's a terrific center. I thought he was he's a guy that, again, he's a good size, 6'3", 300 pounds. His comp in our draft guy from Werner is David Andrews, who's been one of the best underrated centers in the league, honestly. So I think he's a guy who wins with leverage really, really well. He's got to work on his anchor a little bit, work on his power a little bit, but he's a guy that's really good both as a run blocker and really good both as a pass blocker as well. So I love Luke Wypler. I thought there was a chance he might have come back with all the other Ohio State guys returning, but he's still in the draft now, and I still think he's going to be a guy that's one of the top interior offensive linemen in this class and probably a day 2 pick when it's all said and done.
That'd be pretty good. Day 2, second or third round pick for a center. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask about the other offensive lineman here for Ohio State, and I'm going to try to set odds on this. I'm going to say 3-1 plus. I'll make it plus 280. Dawand Jones goes in the first round. And here's my comp, Max. And I remember it happening at the time. I guess it was the 2020 NFL draft. Andrew Thomas is the best tackle at Georgia. He's a top 5 pick. And then there's this other tackle at Georgia, and he's big, and he's interesting, and he goes late in the first round. He goes 29 to the Titans, Isaiah Wilson. He's now a rapper. And I will read from Isaiah Wilson's Wikipedia page. Under the stage name G.G. Bowser, Wilson released a hip-hop EP titled Layup Lines. He washed out. He had a DUI. He washed out in the NFL very quickly. It was kind of a reach, I think, at the time, but you're going on size and athleticism, and a big old tackle makes people go do crazy things sometimes. I don't know if Dawand Jones can rap, but this guy I think is a grinder. He's made himself a great player at Ohio State. Off-field stuff, no issues at all. He's big. He's talented. He's physical. Plus 280. Would you drop, say, $3 on Dawand Jones going in the first round at that mark?
I might. And this is another combine guy that I can't wait to see because, like you said, he's kind of a freak. I mentioned physical tools. Paris Johnson Jr. is probably the best, only because of the athleticism. But Dawand Jones, man, you want the first guy off the bus, you go over Dawand Jones because he's 6'8", 360 pounds. He's reportedly got a 7'6" wingspan. That is ridiculous. It already shocked a lot of people at the Senior Bowl. It broke the Senior Bowl record actually for wingspan. It's going to shock even more people, I think, at the combine. Holy crap, this guy can tie his shoes without even bending over, honestly. So I was so impressed with Dawand Jones this year. He didn't allow a single sack or a hit this year. His 1.3% pressure rate allowed was the best among all tackles in the country. The big question is, He's 6'8", 360 pounds. How is he going to deal with speed rushers? And we saw, he had some issues in the Big Ten this year with some speed rushers, but still, his tape, not only is he a physical monster, he also was really good. It's not like this guy who's just too big. Like I said, his pressure rate was the lowest in the country. I think he's a guy that dominated the Senior Bowl. I was amazed with his Senior Bowl reps. I thought he was one of the biggest winners of the Senior Bowl. So, yeah, I think he's going to be a top 50 pick. And honestly, he could sneak into that first round range if a team really falls in love with those physical tools that he has.
So we've only talked offensive players so far. The guy that I'm in some ways the most intrigued by from Ohio State, at least going into the combine, is Zach Harrison, because I don't know that we have a great grasp after 4 years of watching him play a lot of exactly what kind of NFL prospect he is, at least in terms of like how high he would be evaluated. And PFF loves Zach Harrison. Like, they've loved Zach Harrison, you guys, since like the day he stepped on the field. He's always gotten really strong season-long marks from PFF. That hasn't necessarily resulted in a lot of like edge rusher production, sacks. He didn't have a lot of sacks at Ohio State. So do you see him as somebody who can go to the NFL and make an edge rusher impact? Or are there other ways that he's so good that that's why he's gotten those sorts of high evaluations from PFF?
Yeah, so he's a guy that I know we love, but I know a lot of Ohio State fans have kind of been disappointed by. Who's been a 5-star recruit, and he's always graded really highly for us, but he just really hasn't made the splash plays. But I think he's been a really consistent edge defender for Ohio State over the last 3 years, and he's a really athletic player. Like I said, he's huge. Again, like Dawand Jones, like Paris Johnson Jr., he's super long. He's 6'6", 272 pounds. Like, he's a massive guy, but also he's a freak. Like, he ran a 10.8 second 100-meter dash in high school, which is an insane time for anyone, let alone a 260-plus pound edge defender. So he's a guy that I don't think corners really well. I don't think he plays at an angle really. I don't think his bend is all that great, but he's a linear guy who's just going to try to go through you. So I like him. I think he's a day 2 guy as well. I think he's a guy that can, potentially be a really good run defender in the NFL. We'll see how he is as a pass rusher. So again, I would take him probably late second round, somewhere in that range, maybe early third round. But I like him a lot, and I've always been kind of a Zach Harrison defender over the last 3 years, because I know he's been kind of hated on a lot, but I think he's been a really good player for the last 3 years.
The comp for me as a guy who was a very good player, who it seemed like at least and I think a lot of people had trouble getting a handle on at Ohio State, is Pete Werner, who was good, right? But I was always like, how good? What? And then Pete Werner was the number 60 overall pick in the second round, and then got to the NFL as a good player right away. And it's like, oh, no, okay, he was good the whole time. Sorry. And like, if you tell me that Zach Harrison's going to go at pick 60 and get to the NFL and be good right away, Nathan, and I'm like, oh no, okay, he was good the whole time. That's what, Nathan, that could happen, right?
Well, yeah, and here's another thing. Since we're talking to someone from PFF, like, Pete Werner didn't have great PFF ratings, and for Zach Harrison, it's been consistent. Like, go back to his, like, I think in the last couple of years, he's been in the 80s for the year or close to it, and that's really strong. And I remember that last year where the conversation was out there, like, is Pete Werner like the best defensive player on this Ohio State team? Is Pete Werner like secretly like the best defensive player in the Big Ten or almost? And PFF's numbers weren't quite there. And some of that might have been what Ohio State was asking him to do relative to what he should be doing in the NFL and is doing now in the NFL. But no, that's why I think Zach Harrison is such an intriguing player, because we've always said that, no offense to this, but like one game with a PFF rating, you don't want to make too much out of. But when it's over a long period of time, you can really start to make some interesting comparisons between guys. And for Zach Harrison, it's just been very consistent. Like that he's been rated really strongly by a respected organization that goes through and grades like every snap that these guys do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, he's a guy that, again, like you mentioned, like the one game sample size is always something that we always caution against whenever you're going like that. But like, he's been above 80 every single year. He's 86 this year, 82 last year, 88.8 the year before that in 2020. So I've loved what I've seen from Zach Harrison. I think, obviously PFF grades, I would even say his PFF grades are not the end-all be-all. And this guy who works at PFF. But his stats have always been there as well. And I know the sack numbers are the things that Ohio State fans look at and say, oh, he's never been the best in that department. He's got 12 sacks over the last 3 years. So that's not that impressive, but it's more than just sacks. And I think sacks are maybe one of the most overrated stats when you're evaluating pass rusher. He's a guy that consistently pressures the quarterback, and I think he's a guy that I think will be a pretty good edge defender in the NFL, and a guy that, like a Pete Werner, like you guys said, could surprise some Ohio State fans and go, wow, like I didn't think he had that in him, honestly.
All right, so there's two more Ohio State guys at the Combine, Ronnie Hickman and Cam Brown. No offense to them. We'll see what happens next week, but that's not that an exciting conversation. But Max, before we let you go, I do have a special guest who like to ask you one more question before you leave. Hold on one second. Let me bring him in. Max, this is a two-time national champion Stetson Bennett IV. I cannot believe that you had a conversation about C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young that did not include a two-time national champion. Where do you believe I will be drafted? Early in the first round or late in the first round, Maxwell?
Stetson, I would probably say to you, you're probably going to be a day 3 pick right now. And
how dare you, sir? How dare you?
Not doing yourself too many favors with what you're doing off the field right now. I would say that either. But I think you'll be a good backup quarterback in the NFL. I think you're obviously a winner, which a lot of teams are going to care about. And he's an underrated guy. I think he's a guy that has a better arm than people give him credit for. He's older. Obviously, I think that's well documented. But I think he's a guy that is going to make a long career in the NFL as a backup quarterback as long as he can stay out of trouble.
So I don't know if you could hear it, Max, when Stetson left. When you said backup quarterback, he punched the wall. So he's going to be probably looking for you at the Combine. So watch your back, man. Max, where people want to follow your work, where can they find you? How can they read you? How can they follow you?
Yeah, so you can follow me at @_Maxwick on Twitter, and on I put some TikToks out sometimes too, and then obviously at pff.com.
TikToks? Are you doing a dance? What do you do on TikTok for football?
Dances, unfortunately, no. But it's that app that is exploding right now, and I felt like, man, I should probably get on that if I want to promote.
There's Chinese guys like reading your brainwaves when you're on TikTok.
Yeah,
you know that, right?
Yeah, we'll see what happens, but. Yeah, that, and then I'm putting out like 3 to 4 articles a week at pff.com. So that's been exciting. I put out one today where it's predicting the next quarterback for every top 25 team. And I think Kyle McCord is going to win that job for you guys next year. And I'm excited to see what he does. So, a lot of stuff coming this offseason. So I'm very excited about it. And really appreciate you guys for having me on.
Can I ask real quick, quick impression, Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Dude, unbelievable. He is, I put out a mock draft. If every college football player was eligible and I had him in the top 10 as the number 1 receiver, like I think that guy is going to be like a Jamar Chase level prospect where like that's the guy, that's the number 1 guy right there. And I always thought when he was coming out of high school, like, oh, he's Marvin Harrison's son. Maybe that's why he's a high 4-star recruit. And then I saw he was on the freaks list and I was like, okay, maybe he's a freak athlete. And then he became the best receiver in college. He got robbed of the Blitnikoff this year. I really thought he was the best receiver. And I think he's clearly the best receiver next year. I think Emeka Egbuka is the number 2 receiver in the country next year and in that draft. Ohio State wide receiver U is pretty alive and well right now. And it starts with Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously.
All right, Max Chadwick, great stuff. Thanks so much for your time and for joining us here on Buckeye Talk, and we'll see you at the Combine.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Bye.